Hey friends, do you struggle picking cantrips? Because I sure do. The choice always feels so permanent to me, and I always want to make sure that I'm getting the most useful cantrip that will be useful in the most situations. If that sounds like you, then you are in luck. My name is Timothy, though some people do call me Tim, and I'm a professional dungeon master running over 300 games of Dungeons & Dragons a year. And today, I'm here to help you decide what cantrip will be most useful at your table. Let's get to it. First cantrip that makes the list today is one that requires a lot of DM buy-in. Shape water. Though some of its abilities, like changing colors and opacity of water, are relatively straightforward, the ability to change water into ice has some really interesting ramifications. For instance, if you were to put water into a lock and turn it into ice, what happens? We know in physics some of the things that would actually happen, but we're dungeon masters, not scientists, for crying out loud, and unfortunately that means that our players' different ideas and our ideas of what might be possible are often at odds. The most creative use that I've seen of shape water was at my own table, where somebody created an ice sled with a set of foldable metal skis that they had made for the purpose, and every time they needed a sled, they just pulled out these skis and created the rest out of ice. It made for a bit of a cold butt, but a fast way to get around on the icy lakes of Icewind Dale. This cantrip could easily be the most powerful cantrip or the most useless, depending upon how your DM is going to rule it. Be sure to talk to your DM about it up front, because springing it on them at the last minute increases the odds that you're probably not going to get your way. Next up, we have the quintessential cantrip, Prestidigitation. Aside from having the name that is the hardest to pronounce, Prestidigitation also has the most viable uses in a game of Dungeons & Dragons. Lighting torches with the snap of your fingers, changing the taste of your food so that it's not quite so awful, being used to provide show and tell by creating small images in your hands that you can show somebody to describe something with a visual effect instead of just your words, and of course the highly underrated opportunity to clean things, which, though it's occasionally used when your characters are climbing their way out of some bog, they also are probably going to need that on a daily basis, since most of them probably didn't buy a second set of clothes and they're traveling for months. Whatever the use that you're planning on putting it to, Prestidigitation has the advantage of being probably the most versatile of cantrips. You're not going to be breaking open doors or slaying your foes with this, but if you want to come across as the master of legerdemain, or you just want to be always in a nice clean outfit and eating tasty food, Prestidigitation has something for pretty much everybody. No, hold on a minute. The message cantrip is another highly rated, useful ability. Though it seems like the obvious use case is for sending messages over a reasonable distance, and it does work out as a pretty handy 120-foot walkie-talkie. One of the great uses for Prestidigitation is to, right in front of somebody, have a private conversation that cannot be overheard. Though you may want to cover your mouth to avoid any lip readers, these whispers back and forth between you and one of your allies can be made perfectly silent and only heard by your target so that you can avoid detection. One of the big weaknesses to the message cantrip, however, is that you have to both know where your target is if you're trying to cast through some kind of an object, and also it has a verbal component, meaning that you can't silently send messages on stealth recon unless being 120 feet away is enough for you to avoid notice. Message has a lot of versatile uses that are covered clearly in the rules, making it my pick for number 5. When it comes to spells that are hard to beat for utility, Mage Hand definitely makes the list. Aside from just the old classic flex in public of making something move from where it is to where you want it to be without having to get out of your chair, Mage Hand can be used to test and trigger traps, opening doors and chests without having to be quite as close to them. Similarly, you can use Mage Hand to perform actions that are perhaps out of sight, or to flip a pair of levers that would normally require 2 people, 1 on each. And with the telekinetic feat, making Mage Hand into an invisible Mage Hand, and potentially one with 60 feet of range. The options are not quite limitless, but they are definitely out there. The biggest weakness that Mage Hand has is that it would be such a cool ability to be able to use in a combat situation, but because you have to use an action to cast it and then a second full action in order to be able to do something with it, it takes 2 rounds of combat, which is just too long. Personally, I think that directing it to do something should be a bonus action, which would make it way more fun, but for now, rules as written are as they are written. Speaking of hands doing something out of line of sight, have you hit the subscribe and like buttons yet? Because you really should. Control Flames doesn't make everybody's list of most versatile cantrips, but there are a couple of features of it that make it really stand out compared to other spells that can do similar sorts of things. For one, it's a somatic only spell, which means that it doesn't necessarily give you away in stealth, and it allows you to take a bandit's camp from brightly lit to suddenly dark, all while staying neatly hidden in the shadows far away. Speaking of shadows, it's also great for being able to dim the lighting with a snap of your fingers and then bring it back up to normal, or double the amount of light that a light source is producing to chase away every last shadow in the area. If you've got anybody in your party who is indeed having to carry a torch with them everywhere they go, being able to limit the amount of light that puts out becomes a very useful use for this singular cantrip. Naturally, the biggest drawback and thing working against Control Flames as a super versatile spell is that Dark Vision is just so ever present. But even with Dark Vision being such a pain in our hides, remember that in pure darkness, Dark Vision only brings up to dim light, which reduces passive perceptions by 5 and also makes it possible for you to continue to hold a hidden status with the lightly obscured condition that you're under, whereas in bright light or dim light that was upgraded by Dark Vision, you would be plainly visible. Coming in at number 2, we have Minor Illusion. Because it lacks a verbal component, it can be used in stealthy situations, which makes it great for setting up distractions, ambush points, or for even quiet communication as you whisper in somebody's ear. Because you can create an object up to 5 feet cubed in size, it means that you can use it to break line of sight with cover that is not actually cover, which, as long as your opponents aren't seeing this happening or you're finding a way to make it fit the fiction of the situation, it means that you will be able to ignore your illusion, but they will potentially choose somebody else to target because they don't want to hit the crate you just moved in their path or the wall of stone that just grew up out of the ground. It lasts for 1 minute without costing your concentration, which is an absolute must, and its only real limitation is that everybody always wants to use it to create the illusion of a creature or themselves coming around a corner, and unfortunately it can only create objects. That hasn't stopped some of my players from creating mannequins that appeared to draw fire away from themselves, or lifelike pictures of a villain on a scroll of parchment that appears in order to show somebody a person when they can't create it. Finally, the number 1 most useful cantrip in Dungeons & Dragons. Guidance. The ability to offer a prayer, usually, to your deity and gain a plus 1d4 on your ability check that's about to happen is so powerful in the bounded accuracy system that groups that don't have guidance are significantly at a disadvantage compared to groups that do. There are several limitations that should be applied, however, to guidance, and it's important for DMs to remember. You can't use guidance on a check that's happening if you don't know the check is going to happen beforehand, and also you have to cast a spell in public in order to use this on a social interaction. Despite those limitations, this cantrip is still so powerful that I wouldn't be surprised to see it nerfed in 1D&D. But for now, we can continue to offer prayers and receive divine guidance on almost any ability check. I hope you found this list useful, and if you have, I'd love to hear about it, or if you have something you think should have been in this list that didn't make the cut for me, please let us know down below in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe, and as always, thanks for watching. Happy adventuring.